You're listening to TGIF Geocaching Radio. It's Christmas Day and this is Geopodmas, a special daily audio saga following Tiny Tim and the Treasure Troops. Be sure to catch up and follow the events from day one. As you can probably guess, there's just one more. The 8th day of the 7 days of Geopodmas begins now. Sir Tiny Tim sat curled up on a picnic blanket, fidgeting with a little toy as a nightingale was performing a bird song overhead. He was here on leave, though he always felt ready to jump into action at a moment's notice, enjoying an afternoon with Sergeant Green, Lily and Lyle, Freddie, Marky, and Marbles. After he'd returned to headquarters, Tim decided to give them all a well-deserved day off. He chose a quiet, remote field where there wouldn't be any human interruption, and poofed them there. They were out playing in the field where grass was only in tufts and tossing a little frisbee around. Tim hadn't yet decided who he would promote and take under his wing as a linekeeper. It's quite something to move someone into a brand new role and position with responsibilities out of a role they were happy, confident, and quite capable in. Sir Maximus had mentored Tim since he was a little puppy while he was still sniffing out those geocaches. He hadn't found a place in the organization. Maybe that was the key. Sir Tiny Tim laid his snout on the blanket and watched the troops frolicking out in the field. He was quite content. Then he felt a buzz in his hat, a little vibration. At the same time, the others stopped, each feeling a little vibration in their pockets. I should mention, Lily had worked more of her handy magic and designed a small mobile device that linked in to headquarters' geocache radar. Now they could always have a personal notification device that could point them towards the closest geocache. These are what began vibrating. They were being told that a new geocache was just published, and this one was just down the field past the tree line. Humans must have been here recently. Marbles quickly realized, we should have brought a nav disk. We could find the geocache and make sure it had some treasures in it. Sergeant Green replied, well, we could find it anyway. It's been eons since I've experienced an FTF. Anyone else? They looked at each other, shrugged, smiled, and turned to head in the direction their devices pointed. They didn't have any nav disk because they came with Sir Tiny Tim, not through a portal, but as if someone called it in, a gateway opened back just behind Tim. They all looked back on hearing that familiar sound. Sir Tiny Tim's ears perked up, and then his head, and he turned around and looked up. He jumped, startled at the sight. More than twice his size, a strange green, alien-faced stuffed creature was looking down at him, wearing a linekeeper hat. This alien said something, but Tim couldn't understand. It was a whole new language. It reached out in what looked like an attempt at a handshake, and Tim lifted a paw and said, hoping he understood right, nice to meet you too. This creature held a nav disk, and looking back at the troops, he wound up and whipped it like a frisbee to them. Freddie jumped and caught it. Well, he said, taking a closer look over it, it looks pretty standard. Think it'll work? Lily took the disc and looked over it as well. She shrugged. Only one way to find out. They smiled and dashed off to the tree line to find the geocache, prepared to call in a fresh batch of treasures for the container with the disc if needed. Sir Tiny Tim looked up at the newcomer, tilting his head. He paused for a few seconds. That was a linekeeper's hat on his head, but it wasn't quite straight, maybe a size too small. More importantly, it was Tim's old hat. When he teleported back, he left it sitting in the snow intentionally. This alien then made a motion like jovial laughter with a hand on his belly and pointing to his red and white hat. Then he bent over and mimed a hand picking up the hat from the ground, then as if he were holding reins driving some horses, then pointed back to himself, mimicking putting the hat on his head. Tim was quite intrigued and was now anxious to learn about how exactly the hat had been rescued and come to the alien's possession. Then the alien looked at Tim squarely, pointed at his own chest, and softly and awkwardly spoke, Allen. Well then, could this be his new recruit? If so, he'd passed the first test, returning the hat to him, but it looked like Sir Tiny Tim might have a lot of work ahead. Firstly, having that hat fitted properly for his head. Then Sir Tiny Tim turned and trotted off the blanket. Looking closely at his furry face, you could see his rough black nostrils twitch and flare slightly as he started sniffing and sniffing. And then he paused. His eyelids lifted, revealing his beady eyes, and he looked straight ahead, straight at you. "Hello, human friend, listening," he whispered. "Nice to meet you. I know you can hear me through the gateway window. There always was one more. And you've come along with me this whole time. You know much, maybe too much, but I want to tell you this before you go. I hope that you and your friends and family have a wonderful Christmas, not following the treasures and things in this world, but your hearts, with love and compassion for each other, and may that warmth surround you and give you peace, with many smiles to power your line through life. Have a Merry Christmas, coming to you from the cache line." Then Sir Tiny Tim winked at you, and the gateway window began fading, its edges shrinking and foggy wisps seeming to form words that briefly read, "Happy caching and excellent adventuring," before dissipating in a swirl right now. Thank you for listening to Geopodmas on TGIF Geocaching Radio. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the adventures of the cache line, please comment or send an email to tgif@cachetheline.net, give a like or positive review, and be sure to subscribe to the TGIF Geocaching Radio podcast and Cache the Line on YouTube. Stay tuned for a new regular podcast episode coming up next. And a very special thanks to all of the patrons who support Cache the Line. Consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/cachetheline. Your support is appreciated. And on that note, this is Geoff signing off for Christmas. See you next time.